Hello, everyone, and welcome to Financial Friday, where I, Shoeless Joe, an absolute financial non expert, talk about finances, money. Now, today is the first episode, and we're just going to keep it simple and talk about, do we need to budget? Do you need to budget? Do I need to budget? And if you want to know if you should be budgeting your money, you got to know what your money goals are, or if you have any. You also got to know exactly what is a budget. Now, a budget is when you track all of your money and you see where it's going and you see if you spend too much of it. Some people will tell you that you have to have a budget if you want to get serious about controlling your money, and others will tell you you don't. And I would say you got to do what you got to do. And I don't know that budgeting is necessarily for everyone. I grew up not even really knowing about budgeting or thinking about budgeting. I never heard my parents really talk about budgeting or anything. In fact, probably most of the boomers that I know never really or don't really budget per se. I don't know if it's because like the 80s and 90s were just financially great or what, but in the circles I grew up in, there was an idea of we can't afford this. Like there was the idea of we aren't going to spend money that we don't have. But there was no one sitting down specifically counting the pennies and keeping track of where all the money went. Now, I started budgeting years ago, around the time I started teaching people how to use Excel. So I have a job as an applications instructor. So I teach all sort of different software applications. And the one I teach the most is Excel. Now, I have a degree in theater and English. So I was never really a spreadsheet kind of guy. I avoided Excel. I tried to do everything in Microsoft Word that I possibly could without going into Excel. Now I'm the opposite. I love Excel and I love budgeting with Excel. I mean I love budgeting. I don't mean I love the effects. A lot of people like the effect of budgeting, but they don't enjoy the process. I actually enjoy the process. Like my way of procrastinating on something I don't want to do is to budget and open up my spreadsheet and play. Like that is play to me. And if that sounds sick, it probably is. There's probably something wrong with me. So I love budgeting. Budgeting is so good for me. I like tracking every little penny and seeing where it goes and seeing where I can finagle things. And it also really helps me to see where I'm spending more than I would like to be. Because when you budget, of course, you categorize things, right? So I categorize entertainment or food. And I can look at one of those categories and say, how do we spend this much money going to the movies this month? And the answer would be easily, you didn't spend any because you can't go to the movies. It's 2020. But you get the idea, right? You can see where you're spending too much and where you have room to cut back when you budget. If I don't budget, I'm like, woo, money goes here, money goes there. So do you need to budget? I don't know. I don't think that budgeting is for everyone. Some people get really stressed and overwhelmed by budgeting. If I were to die tomorrow, I can guarantee you Erin is never going to budget. She just doesn't budget. It's not in her. It's not the way her brain works. And I when I started budgeting, I kind of took over the finances in our household. But before that, Erin kind of ran the finances and she didn't budget. She just kind of had a general idea of how much was coming in and how much was going out. And I think that that is fine. If you want to do it that way, I would say that if you're not going to budget, you just need to not spend more than you make. And you also need to be saving and putting money aside for saving. So, which both those things that everyone should do, right? But that's like a bare minimum. If you're not going to budget, you need to be, I would say, automating and having money just going into a separate savings or checking account or something, so that if you run into an emergency, that money's there. Because if you're not budgeting, you're not going to be hard and fast about how much money you spend on a regular basis. So it'd be important to have that emergency fund kind of ready to go. But if you're putting money away for saving just in case something were to happen, and if you don't spend more than you make, then I don't see the problem. Now, the tighter you are on money, I would say the more you actually maybe do need to budget. So if I'm living paycheck to paycheck, like I'm trying to make it through to the end of the month and my bank account's like dwindling to zero and I don't have any savings or I don't have much savings, like the tighter you are on money, I would say the more that you really should budget and you really need to track every penny. But once you build up that emergency fund, once you get a little bit of wiggle room, I wouldn't say no. I don't think you necessarily should budget unless you have goals that might require you to budget. And you might just budget one thing. You might just say, I just feel like I spend too much money on coffee. So I'm going to budget coffee and I'm going to track how much money I spend on coffee. So even if you do budget, you don't have to budget everything. I love budgeting everything. I track every single penny that I spend. I have categories for all that stuff. So I like to track all of that. But you can just track one thing, or you can have really generic categories that a lot fall under, right? So you could track coffee and everything else and just have two categories like that. So you can budget whatever makes sense for you. Anything that you want to change, you need to track. So if you want to change how much you spend, then I would suggest budgeting and tracking it. But if you don't want to change, then I would say no. Why would you budget? If you are doing fine, just having a general idea of how much goes in and comes out, you don't need to budget. But I am always trying to question where I'm spending my money. I am always looking to change and improve. So because I do want to change my spending habits, I do budget. Does that make sense? So I would say if you don't want to change any of your spending habits, you don't necessarily need to budget. If you want to change specific spending habits, then I would say you would probably need to budget at least on those habits. You maybe are just budgeting how much you spend on clothes because you feel like maybe you spend too much. Or maybe you want to spend more money in a certain area. Maybe I want to be able to spend more money on clothes. And I say, how can I do that? That's something I enjoy. So maybe I'm budgeting in other areas to say, well, let me see if I can cut down on spending in these other places, right? So if you want to make changes, then you might have to start budgeting and tracking those items. Now, how you budget is for a whole different day, okay? There's apps. I just use a spreadsheet to do it, right? There's all sorts of different ways. So we can talk more about that in the future. But I'm curious to know from you in the comments below if you budget or not. Do you budget? Do you budget but you don't enjoy it? Is anyone like me and actually like enjoys budgeting? Like I love it. So let us know if you think that, and some people maybe are like, oh, I don't really budget, but I feel like I should budget, or I want to start budgeting this, that, or the other. So I challenge you to just question that and start thinking about, if I don't budget, would it be beneficial? Are there things that I think I could improve or change? So let us know your thoughts on budgeting and how you budget or don't budget and why you budget or don't budget and whether you like to budget or not to budget. So let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to keep it simple, question everything, and stay radical. And join me tomorrow for a cup of joe. Goodbye forever. For now.